Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breeze Time with Kathy. I was very fortunate when I was a child because my parents, the year before I was born, bought a house on a great big piece of land in a sort of semi-rural area. It was only about 20 minutes from New Orleans, but it was a wonderful place for a kid to grow up. Now, my mother had no green thumb, but the person who'd lived there before, John Truell, she had planted just about any kind of fruit tree that could possibly grow in Belchase, Louisiana. She planted it, let me tell you, in that yard. And it was quite an experience to grow up there. We had so many wonderful trees and plants and flowers. We had beautiful gardenia bushes. Oh, every year when the gardenias bloomed, my mother would, in the spring, about this time of year, they would smell so fragrant. She would go out and cut the gardenias very carefully, because on gardenias, if you touch the leaves, they'll turn brown. And she'd float them in a bowl, and it was would fill the house up with gardenia scent. It was also a pyracantha tree, which I had a pyracantha bush, which had red berries on it. Now, the red berries, you couldn't eat them, but they did turn bright red at Christmas time, so we didn't have holly berries, so we would use, my mother would decorate the house with pyracantha for her red and green Christmas scene. But we had great trees that were wonderful to climb. We had Japanese plums, we had figs. Now, we used to have good figs. As a matter of fact, every spring when the figs came in, my brothers used to pick the figs and sell the figs. The problem, they used to sell the figs. They'd put a sawhorse, a cardboard sign out on the road that said figs for sale, and they'd stick it out there. And somebody'd have to sit and wait see if anybody would stop and buy figs. That was my brother's project. When I was getting ready to help pick figs, I found out I was allergic to the white sap on the fig when you pick it, and so I couldn't do that. Actually, I got out of a couple of things because of allergies, or at least reactions. We had bees. Now, my dad was quite good at picking up just about anything. Now, he'd never kept bees before, but Miss Truell had, Aunt Jean, we used to call her, because the neighbors, that was their aunt, their great aunt was Aunt Jean. So Aunt Jean Truell had kept bees in order to pollinate all of those wonderful trees she had. I mean, she had pear trees and peach trees and persimmon trees. So she had bees. Now, the bees were quite a challenge. My dad decided the beehive shortly after we moved there, which we moved there in 54 and I was born in 55, and this was sometime in 54. Mother thought the beehive was too close to the house. So, considering we had almost 2 acres, my dad was going to move it further back. Well, he went ahead and blocked up the hive, and he started moving the beehive. Well, unfortunately, he didn't know very much about bees at that time, I guess, because the bottom dropped out of the hive and the bees came after him. Well, he starts running, and he runs toward the house, and he yells for my mother to get the hose, and if you spray the water on him, he figures the bees will go, will get off of him. And so that's what he does. And so he sprays Mom gets out there and she sprays the water hose on Dad. And yeah, the bees run away from Dad, but they start chasing Mom. Bless her heart. Mom ran all around the house. She was probably only about 20 feet from the door, but the bees were coming at her from that direction, so she took off. She ran past the front of the house, and she ran all the way around to the back side, to the door, the long way, and ran in the house The thing was, she was about 8.5 months pregnant at the time, she said, and she had gotten stung, at least a dozen times. And she said, she thought she started having contractions. She thought I was going to be born that night. Well, what's funny is, though, my dad taught my older brothers how to keep the bees and rob the hive and get the honey and process the honey. When it was after they went away to school, to college, Dad wanted to show me, but unfortunately he couldn't, because out of all my family, I was the only one who had a reaction to bees. I always suspected it was because my mother got stung so much when she was 8 months pregnant with me. But the yard was indeed beautiful and just a heaven for kids. As I said, we had so many different kinds of trees. My mother loved the Japanese persimmon tree that we had. I never liked persimmons, never did, but my mother loved persimmons. And every year the tree would have lots and lots of persimmons. And so she'd have to not only get the persimmons for herself, and she'd have to give them away. And one time she tried to make persimmon ice cream. It was homemade ice cream. That was not a good thing. It did not work. Now, she did have a cooking pear tree, which I don't know that much about pears, but I was told that these pears were hard and sort of greenish yellow, and you really couldn't eat them. They were for cooking, and it bore tons and tons of cooking pears. But the problem was, nobody wanted them. So we used to have to pick them up because they were right there by the back door, and if you let them fall to the ground and rot, well, that was a problem. So we'd have to pick them up and we'd dump them. If we couldn't give them away, we'd dump them somewhere in the woods. Well, we also had mulberry trees, which were great. I loved mulberries because mulberries were great. They didn't have seeds in them like blackberries do. You know, blackberries are good, but mulberries are better in my opinion, well, when you're a kid. And the only thing was, my mother had a thing with the mulberries, because not only did we kids eat the mulberries, and of course we'd run around barefoot all summer, and our feet would be all stained with mulberry juice, and we'd come back with stained feet, stained fingers from the mulberries. But fortunately, this was back in the days before my mother went back to work as a nurse, and she was at home. My little sister wasn't in school yet. She was too young. And my mom did the laundry, and she took the laundry and she put it out on the line to dry. And of course it was mulberry season, and the birds ate the mulberries, and they, well, you know what I mean. They deposited mulberry stained material all over her clean sheets. Well, she pulled them back in, she washed them again, she put them back out. It happened again. She pulled them back in, she washed them. She swore up and down that she wasn't gonna do this anymore. She was gonna go back to work as a nurse as soon as Betsy, my younger sister, was in school, and she would buy a dryer and she would hire somebody to come take care of the house. That she would definitely be, this staying at home stuff was not for her. She was just not a housekeeper. She decided she was a much better part-time housekeeper, full-time mother, full-time nurse than she was a full-time mother, full-time housekeeper. And to tell you the truth, she's probably right, because that ended up giving me one of the great blessings of my life, among the many I had, but is that Nancy McGinnis, who I've talked about perhaps before, and the article I wrote in the newsletter for this month was about Nancy. She came to us when I was about 6 years old, and she took care of us really the rest of our lives, and she was just a good, wonderful woman with a great witness of faith and an excellent cook. Well, there's lots of things I could talk about that, but I'm talking about the yard. This yard was amazing. We had a black cherry tree, and my parents, I can remember they used to lay, and the neighbors, they'd get together and they'd during black cherry season. It was a funny big tall tree, and the cherries were tiny, tiny. I don't know, we called it that. And they laid out newspapers, and then they shook the tree and shook the tree, and then they collected the cherries, and they made something called cherry bounce. Well, I never got to taste the cherry bounce, and I didn't know why I never got to taste the cherry bounce, but apparently cherry bounce is fermented and is alcoholic. I still haven't tasted cherry bounce. I guess I'll go my whole life, but I'll survive not having ever tasted cherry bounce. They only did it a few years that I remember, and then after that, I think it was got to be too much trouble. Yeah, it was quite a wonderful place to grow up. We had lots of terrific trees and adventures there in that big old yard of mine. We had Japanese plums and gorgeous, just gorgeous trees and flowers. In addition to that, but probably one of the prettiest things we had were the hydrangeas. You know, this week being Easter weekend, one of the residents over in Healthcare Center got a beautiful hydrangea plant, and it just brought to mind the beautiful hydrangeas we used to have. They grew right outside the house. The house was in a wood frame house built in about 1910, and it was what we call a double shotgun style, meaning that on each side the rooms lined up from front to back. There was a hallway that connected them in the living room, and there was a hallway that a little door that connected the other side in the living room, and a door that connected them in the bedroom, in the back room. So when I was a kid, you could go around in circles in the house when my brother was chasing me, which I did often. But the thing about the house is it was built up off the ground on piers, like so many of the older houses in the South are. That was so the air could flow. It would cause less of a problem with water, with rot, with that sort of thing. Kept the house cooler. Of course, the ceilings were tall. They were 9 feet tall, I guess. Maybe just 8 or 9 feet tall. And it was just a very nice, I think it was 9 feet tall. And it was 8 feet tall. Excuse me, I know that. It's 8 feet. Oh, my brothers would be all over this. Well, anyway, but they were nice, big, and we had lots of big double-hung windows. You know, the double-hung windows with the weights in the side, and sometimes you could hear them clang. As a matter of fact, our property extended all the way back to the railroad tracks, and then there was just a few hundred feet of land, and then there was the levee and the Mississippi River. And the Mississippi River was quite tall there. It seemed to me, though, my sister tells me they've made it even taller since Katrina. And the land there was really nice. But when the boats would pass by on the river, and sometimes with the long, and the waves would hit the side of the levee, the house would shake. That would also happen with trains, with big trains that went by. If they went by a little fast, you could hear the house shaking, and the weights that were inside the casement of the windows, you could hear them rattle. You remember? I don't know if y'all lived in a house like that. Any of y'all did, but I did. And I could hear the foghorns at night. Particularly the fog seemed worse at night, but it would be there during the day. But you'd hear the foghorns and the anchor chains. Yeah, it was so nice. And particularly when the trains would come past, I can remember running out into the field and going to the railroad track and waving to the engineer. What a big deal to get the engineer to wave back. And sometimes he'd pull he'd blow his whistle for us. And that was a big thrill. Small pleasures, for children. But that's the way it is in childhood. And this springtime weather, reminds me of my childhood. Because it seems like those are the days it just, the smells of springtime bring back the memories of childhood for me. I remember looking for four-leaf clovers. I was never any good at finding four-leaf clovers, but I can remember making daisy chains and from the clover, clover flowers, and just laying there, because clover for some reason is cool. It's cooler than the other grass that grew around it. I don't know why, but it seemed that way to me when I was young. And it was really nice. But I remember the hydrangeas. That's what I wanted to tell you about. This time of year in the spring, in May, and usually in April and May, in June, early June, the hydrangeas would bloom, and we had the most beautiful hydrangea bushes right outside, growing along the north side of the house. I guess they don't like full sun. I don't know, but they grew beautifully there. It was just wonderful, and they were beautiful. They were deep blue hydrangeas, just lovely. I learned later on that you can change the color of hydrangeas. My neighbor used to throw rusty nails in there. Something about the iron would change the color of the hydrangeas. I didn't know that much about it, but I do remember those hydrangea bushes. And then, when I was about 11, my hydrangeas died. We never expected the hydrangeas to die, but that's what happened. You see, what happened was, my dad was told that the house had a septic tank when he moved in, and it did. And all the toilets were hooked up to the septic tank. And there was the gray water, the other water from like the sink and the bathtub. Well, that water ran into a open little drainage ditch. We used to call it the slop ditch, because nothing much grew there, and it was kind of ugly. And and my brothers used to stick a stick in there and get some of the black, ugly goo out of it and chase us around, telling us they were going to get the slop from the slop ditch all over it, slop ditch all over us kids. But what my dad discovered was that the bathtub didn't connect to the gray water that flowed into the drainage ditch, the slop ditch. No. What he found out was that when you pulled the plug, the water ran through a pipe out of our old cast iron bathtub with legs on it, just like the ones you see in all the movies. And it ran right under the house, and it flooded the underside of the house right there, which of course is right where the hydrangeas grew, and the hydrangeas love water, and they thrived. Well, when my father found out that, in his mind, that did not constitute modern plumbing, and he was assured it had, for 1954, modern plumbing. It had city water. My mother wouldn't live any place where we had cisterns, and the city water had come through about 10 years before. As a matter of fact, we had two huge cistern stands. The cisterns were gone, but the brick stands that the cisterns used to set on were still there, and they kind of made wonderful areas for forts or other kinds of imagination and things like that. They were like a brick T and X. One went this way, one went that way, you see, and you set the stand on top of it, the cistern on top of it. And we had the big hoops, the big metal hoops that went around the wooden staves of the cistern. It was a wooden cistern, apparently, and there were originally two of them. And so we had two cistern stands, so they were fun to play on. So we had city water. We didn't get plumbing until I was we didn't get the sewage put in, city sewage put in until probably I was about a teenager. And it was when I was about 11 or 12, Dad discovered that when you pulled the plug on the tub, the water went down the pipe and spread out under the house. So he immediately decided he had to fix that. He fixed it. The water supply dried up, and all my beautiful hydrangeas died. We never could get them to grow again. You know, sometimes the things we think we're doing are good end up having a effect we just didn't foresee. Oh no, I think probably for a lot of reasons it was better if the hydrangeas, but I missed the hydrangeas. If I'd have known I had to trade the hydrangeas for the fact that the water ran under the house, I would have probably asked my father not to change anything. After all, it'd been that way for years. Just wait till the city water came in. Of course, I would have, the city sewage, because I probably would have lost it then. But I guess what I want to say is, it happens that way in life. Big things, little things. Unintended consequences. You know? We can't foresee the impact of what we do. And sometimes that works in a positive way because we do something small we think doesn't make a difference, but it makes a huge difference. And sometimes we do something we think is good and it ends up having a ripple effect in things we just didn't foresee. But the truth is we can't see it all. And that is what the piece I'd like to take away. God does. God sees it all and sees all the possibilities of the things that we do. So considering we can't, even in small things, it doesn't hurt to pause a second and to see if God will give you a little guidance and ask God to give you a little guidance about it. Because after all, you don't want to lose something good, like beautiful hydrangeas. Well, I feel real homesick right now. But you know how it is. The home I'm thinking of doesn't exist anymore. The land does. The house does. But it's changed. The land's changed. It's not exactly the same. But that's all right. As good as my memories are of my childhood, what awaits us in the joys of heaven is even better. Until next time, God bless you.